Our last presentation for today. We're going to stay on the theme of online advertising, but we're going to take a Horizon 3 view. We're going to be looking a little bit further out. What does this look like 18 months, 2 years out? What are those trends, those high-level trends that we can identify today, and how do we set sail to ride the waves to take us towards those new destinations? Before I introduce our speaker, we have a little video to give you a sense of what Tim is going to tell us about. Could we have the video, please?
Ads fund a lot of online content, but they may have gotten out of control.
It's not a user experience people want, and that's where we come in.
Our next speaker developed a tool for blocking ads.
So advertising per se is not the problem, bad advertising is.
But he also has suggestions on new revenue models that ensure content creators are rewarded without drowning us in ads.
All the clutter is gone. You don't have 5 banners, 10 banners on a page. You have 1 or 2, and they're highly targeted, and that's fine.
Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome to the stage to tell us about the future of online advertising and how ad blocking helps shape it. Mr. Tim Schumacher, co-founder and former CEO of Sedco.com, now founder and chairman of IO.com. Tim Schumacher, please come and join us on stage.
Hey, hello everyone. Good evening. Happy to be here for the last presentation. This is actually kind of my former crowd. I used to really be in the domain and hosting business with Cedo.com, a company I helped start and then later sold to United Internet. And I really changed sides. I changed sides from the domain and hosting world to the online advertising world. But it's been really a pleasure to see a lot of you again. 2004 was kind of my very first web hosting back then, now world hosting days. Some of you might recall Søren here, who was still properly dressed with a nice haircut, everything, and a very small crowd in Cologne. So that was 2004, and a lot of things which are totally common these days did not exist back in 2004, just like this industry has grown. So for example, on mobile, we didn't really have mobile advertising. That was the mobile phone of 2004. A little bit of SMS advertising, but that was pretty much it. There was also very little information, very little innovation on the banner side. In 2005, some of you might recall the $1 million homepage, just a big bunch of banners, one pixel, $1, where a student raised $1 million through that. But really, that was fun, of course. But really, there was not much innovation. That was one of the most innovative things during that time in online advertising. And really, nothing had happened since the very first banner, which is this one here. It was a campaign for AT&T in 1994. It did not show the brand, but it just basically showed you what you're supposed to do, namely click on a banner. But again, very little innovation. That has actually changed. So a lot of things actually happened in 2003, 4, 5 during that time, which have shaped the way online advertising works for over a decade now, and which also paved the way to some of the worst problems we see these days. 2003, Facebook was founded. Of course, no advertising at first, but as you all know, Facebook is by far the biggest platform, the biggest publisher after Google these days, and really has been doing a lot of innovation, good and bad, around advertising, which we now see today. Also in 2004, retargeting was innovated. Criteo, for example, was founded back then. Basically the idea that a user who is in a shop then visits another publishing site, is recognized by a cookie or by some other means, and will then be presented another banner, whether it's an upsell, a possibility to get him back, or something else. And it's something where a lot of people get very annoyed about, because they feel tracked, they feel followed around, And it's the one thing where privacy actually comes into play, and privacy becomes, or actually the violation of privacy suddenly becomes tangible. Privacy is a big word. Everybody says privacy is important. People don't live by it. But this is the one thing where privacy suddenly comes into play because people see what is actually what is happening, and will essentially then suddenly see what it means to be tracked. And in 2005, next innovation, YouTube was started, and the following year acquired by Google, driving a huge amount of innovation in the video advertising industry, which again, as I'll show in a second, haunts us now. So basically, over the last decade, online advertising has exploded into a huge market. This is just as an example, because it's the biggest advertising market in the world with $70 billion, the US. The total worldwide market is about $200 billion, so US is about 1/3. The split is pretty much the same in most parts of the world. Search is almost half, majority of that Google, but then Bing is catching up, Yahoo has a share, and in some other countries, Yandex, Baidu, Naver, and other local players who often dominate their local markets. Then there's about 1/4, a little less, is classic banners, and then there's a big part, video, rich media, including flash banners and a lot of the evil stuff. And you'll see in a second why I've colored those green, yellow, and red. And I'll get back to that in a second. But it's a huge market, and it fuels the internet, it fuels content production, and it also fuels a lot of hate by users. And so the market today is really crazy. It's a huge market where a lot of actors try to get their piece of the pie. So between the marketer on one side, the advertiser, and on the other side, the consumer, who sees an advertising on the publisher, there are dozens of companies who try to have their little piece, which is what we call in online advertising the online advertising Lumascape, and they all want their piece. The Guardian, for example, they made a nice test a couple of months ago. They spend $1 or $1,000 on their own site, and through real-time bidding, and basically try to buy their own ads through that big chain. And at the end, they only got 1/4 as the publisher. So 75% of the money actually stayed within all those actors in the chain. No wonder, of course, that journalism is suffering, and of course, with all the problems which come with it, fake news, less and less really investigative journalism, and all the problems of the advertising financed web. So this is really how the industry looks like, and what it looks like for the user is not much better. It's a space where the biggest incentive is just get a user somehow on a site, get them to click somehow, and then deliver ads, no matter on what happens, and then, have them leave. So there's no real difference in online advertising whether you have a really well-researched article and people read that for minutes or even longer, or if you have something where people just see a headline and bounce right back. For the ad industry, it's the same. And so it's really, it's symptomatic of a lot of the problems we've seen in publishing. But there's help. And around the same time when this innovation happened, there's been another trend happening, a pro-user trend. The users have been, even back then, increasingly frustrated with big companies, big advertising companies, wanting to dominate the market for them. So in 2004, and I find that probably the biggest event in terms of a single company funding, or in this case a foundation, one single product. I mean, there are a lot of initiatives, but this is, to me, probably the most remarkable one, the founding of Firefox. So in 2004, November, Mozilla released their first version, 1.0 version of the browser. And actually, one of the core proposals to the user was that it has a built-in pop-up blocker, which automatically blocks pop-up ads. So essentially, Mozilla Firefox invented the ad blocker, and not even that, they invented the discriminatory ad blocker. I mean discriminatory in a positive sense, namely that they said, okay, some ads, in this case pop-ups, and if you might remember 2002, 3, 4, the web was littered with pop-ups. They said, well, let's just ban this type of advertising, but let's leave all the good advertising there. And they did this in a very simple way, and as you know, the rest is history. Within 1, 2, 3 years, they have completely dominated the browser space and taken the share from Microsoft Internet Explorer. Now, of course, that has yet changed again with Chrome taking their lunch, but in general, Firefox is very successful, and I find it so remarkable because they've been completely user-focused and also not financed by any big corporation or so. So that's been kind of really a nucleus of user innovation, which started around the same time that all those other developments started place, and is also the nucleus on which we started. And I'll give you a quick rundown of what we do before I kind of get to the broader trends. So we started in 2006 based on the Firefox platform. The Firefox platform was the first one who allowed extensions. Back then, Microsoft said, you know, we want to control it all. You couldn't do anything with IE. And Edge actually is a good product now. I think they made the right decision, by the way, to change to a new browser environment, which is just completely getting rid of the past, also a branding issue. But Firefox really started with that, and Chrome, of course, followed suit, and all the other browsers. All the modern browsers basically are modeled after this open infrastructure of Firefox. So we came out as the first ad blocker on Firefox. Chrome was not existent back then, and IE had no extension. Not by me, so I was in the introduction, I was wrongly credited as the inventor of AdBlock Plus, which I'm not. I started the company behind AdBlock Plus, but this credit goes to a guy named Vladimir Palant, who lives in Cologne as well, and has started that as a hobby. So for 5 years, he grew AdBlock Plus just as a hobby, because he was frustrated about online advertising himself. And so we grew, or he grew first, slowly but steadily, purely through word of mouth, because people really downloaded AdBlock Plus, and when they downloaded AdBlock Plus once, they were like, oh wow, the internet is so great, I never want to go back again, never ever. And I think, I don't probably need to make a show of hands here, but if I would make a show of hands in such a technologically competent audience, like probably 80 or 90% of people would use an ad blocker here. So the interesting phenomenon is these days, the more competent, the more technologically savvy, also the younger the audience is, the more ad block users you find. Then 2011, we teamed up, started a company together based on the model as Mozilla to get rid of bad ads while preserving the good ads. We expanded on multiple platforms. Opera, Chrome were next. Then we actually even managed to develop an extension on IE, and finally moved to mobile. So now you can download it for iOS and Android as well. We now have over 1 billion downloads altogether, but people install AdBlock Plus multiple times and new computers, and 10 years is a long time. So it's about 100 million active users. And active, of course, means that AdBlock Plus as a plugin filters everything on every single request, mostly on desktop. We're 100% open source, and it's a team of 80 and also self-funded. So we're operating out of cash flow, and we're quite proud of that, of not being venture financed. at all. So that's kind of where those 10 years have led the market to actually something where, and that was to us the biggest testimonial of all, where Snowden tweeted in November 2015 saying using an ad blocker is not just a right but a duty. And I probably I'm preaching to the wrong audience here, because I think as technological this audience is, you all know why you use an ad blocker, but I want to quickly mention the 4 main reasons and give some stats around that, why people actually use an ad blocker. The first one is obvious, it's annoyance. And those little monsters, by the way, they're our company mascots. You can actually, we have them as graffitis on the wall and as little pets. We have 4 monsters for the 4 annoyances at AdBlock Plus. So this is the pure annoyance monsters. It's all the pop-ups, the flash banners, the videos. Of course, you see that. That's the thing above the iceberg, above the waterline, where you actually see what is wrong and why most people actually install an ad blocker. But it's also speed, which is also part of the annoyance. The load time, how long it takes to load a page, it's over 50% faster without ads. And of course, wait time is part of annoyance. But then it goes kind of below the waterline into the iceberg. The second big reason is malvertizing. Here in the hosting world, of course, you deal with malvertising on other levels, how it occurs. But actually, a Cisco security report found that 16% of malware incidents, so it's not the majority, but it's a decent portion, is actually delivered through advertising. And I'm sure you all know and you all deal with the other 84%, but 16% is a major problem. The OTA, I think, Online Trust Alliance, estimated it was 200,000 incidents last year, with over 12-something billion ads served, which were actual malware ads, trying to get people to click on a banner, which then served some malware. And actually, it's just increasing. So it increased from 2015 to 2016, it increased by 130%. So the problem is growing because the mechanisms get more automated, and it's easier for fraudsters to actually deliver malvertising in ad forms. Then the next thing, reason number 3, is tracking. Another iceberg. That's what I said earlier. Privacy is a thing where a lot of people talk about them, but most regular users can't really grasp what it means or what they should do, like Tor or something. It's just too complicated. It's like they don't bother with it. They don't like it. Like if you have a survey, probably 80%, 90% of people say privacy matters, but then when it comes to making actual purchasing decisions, they don't. And so it's the same with ads. There's the ads is the visible part, but then on an individual page, like build.de, for example, has over 50 trackers, and that's pretty common. Is that actually pages are just, the publishers have given up control of where the data lands, and so users' personality profiles, users' history, so browsing history, and a lot of other factors are actually tracked, assimilated, and then, of course, used and often misused. And that is part of what also an ad blocker can stop, because basically you can configure any ad blocker, AdBlock Plus or whatever you use, you can configure it to block trackers as well. It's usually just one click, and then it does it. And then the fourth factor is data costs. On desktop, it's pretty trivial, but it has to do something with the loading time. So the growth of website pages went from 700 kilobytes to over 2 megabytes of a one web page in 2016. But the problem is even bigger on mobile. And the most interesting stat I think I've ever found in this data costing is that stats of the New York Times. And they've estimated, they've actually checked that, the cost of mobile ads on the top 50 news websites, US news websites, but German ones or French ones or whatever would be pretty much the exact same thing. So they have compared the costs of loading the data to get the content with the cost of loading the advertising. And so the first really interesting thing is that the cost to load the advertising, and please keep in mind here, this is the New York Times saying that. It's not an ad blocker or user advocates. It's actually a company which profits from that. Boston.com is a subsidiary of the New York Times. Maybe I don't know, there was a little internal fight with their subsidiary, but I think New York Times is on 5 or 6 or something. So it's really a problem they've admitted themselves. And it means that the cost of loading a website is mainly driven by advertising. And then what is worse is that the cost to the user, of each one of us, our data plans, is higher than what those publishers make through advertising. If on average, like if we visit Boston.com or Independent.com or one of the sites, we make 1, maybe 2 cents maximum. But the cost to load the content is much higher. So the big problem is that there is no micropayment, that there's actually but the system is wrong. There's no way of actually fixing this problem, but although we're spending much more money than what the publishers make, but there's no way to pay them directly. And that's where the core of the problem lies, and it's actually something we're also trying to fix. But yeah, what is the problem is how do we get money to websites? That is the fundamental problem of advertising and on financing content, and that is, of course, the question we've also asked ourselves. And so really briefly, what our approach is here is that we say there's some advertising which is very disruptive, the big banners, pop-ups, videos, all of that, and then there's some advertising which is fine, like usually small, static, text-based, image-text combinations, non-animated, no sound, no flash. Users are usually fine with that. Our research shows that it's fine with that, and the user behavior shows that it's fine, and we let those through. That is our approach. So we check for placement, we check for size, obviously for the format, what's in, and for a clear distinction, so that it's clearly labeled advertising. And this stuff we let through, and this way our idea is, okay, we can help the web finance itself, but at the same time get rid of bad advertising. Just like what Mozilla did with pop-ups. Pop-ups are pretty much dead. The other ones followed, Chrome and others followed. These days, pop-ups are dead. Very simple, user-induced, and that's what we're trying with the rest of the online advertising market. And to finish that part about AdBlock Plus, before I go into the further trends, a lot of people have actually always said to us, it's like, who are you guys to make the standards for online advertising? We said, well, you know, we've got over 100 million users, and they have given us the mandate to do that. But we'd like to now take this one step further. Actually, we've announced that last week, is that we want to bring those standard-setting policies into a committee. We call this the Acceptable Ads Committee. Acceptable Ads is our initiative. And the idea is that there's a user advocate coalition, so users, digital rights organizations, and they sit basically across the table from the for-profit coalition, the ad tech people, the publishers, the agencies, and they're supplemented by experts, by researchers, universities, and so on, to, for the first time, actually have something where a lot of people make up their mind collectively of what good is, what not. The problem at the moment is all the initiatives in the world are always driven from the either advertising or publisher side. Nobody cares about the users. And they are not, if you look at any of those, there are some other initiatives out there which try to regulate online advertising. They're always focused on making money. Nobody is focused on the user. And that's what we're aiming to change that. And basically the users who've downloaded our software are giving us the mandate to try to change that market. And that is kind of what drives our philosophy about thinking of what the next steps are in online advertising. At the end of the day, and that's this little slide kind of brings the two different poles back to what it can be. Marketing can either be pushing something on users, so being loud and trying to be heard, or it can be a magnet of pulling users and something which users actually want, and then helping them to make the right decision and helping them in a non-obtrusive way. And so my belief is, and you'll see when I come to those trends now, is my belief is that actually the trend clearly goes to the right side, is that we can't annoy users. We can't, and that goes for any medium. We can't do stuff against the user. And so kind of going to this slide back is the green part is fine, I think, and there's some work to be done on the yellow part. The red stuff is the stuff which really annoys the users, the videos and the rich media stuff. It's just not working. It's like in TV, people just leave the room, and the same kind of technologically happens on the internet. So the idea is not this. The idea is not to test new digital ad formats which are harder to ignore. The idea is to make advertising together with the users. And what is this for the future? That's the kind of the question we're always asking ourselves, because blocking ads is one thing, but then trying to have an ecosystem which delivers good advertising is the harder question. And if you think of what the trends are, they're really, you hear a lot of buzzwords, and I'll use some of the buzzwords in a second. But at the end of the day, it boils down, advertising always boils down to two things, to either methods or media. Their methods, like public relations or billboard advertising, is a method. It's like taking your thing and plastering it somewhere. Whether it's the internet, whether it's a billboard, whether it's TV, it's the same method. It's taking your message, plastering it somewhere. And then there's media. It's like, where is that? And there's been, of course, an evolution of media. There's been print back then. There have been billboards. There's TV. Then there's been the internet, and of those, this is like the carrying media. But then let's not confuse those two things, because some of the methods, they always appear, whatever happens. There's always going to be, in new methods, people will always try to push their media on the user. Nevertheless, there'll be both of those things. And I'll start with the methods. Those are my 5 methods where I think in the future, advertisers will use them more. Content. That's probably trivial, and that is Red Bull. Red Bull is an example for a brilliant content marketer. Around everything they do, they produce contents. They have their own media companies. They have their own football club, as you know, and they build stories around what you can do, that you can basically suddenly fly when you drink this. And so building content around what you do is definitely a winning strategy. Now you might say, most of you being in the B2B space here, you might say, well, this is really something different, an energy drink. But then you can look at a company, for example, which does that well in the B2B space, and to my mind comes HubSpot. HubSpot, and I can recommend their blog, because they're churning out content on content about marketing. It's a marketing automation software, and I read their content just because it's good. And then suddenly, of course, you start using their product. If you want some best practice, really outside the hosting industry of a company which has really done content production and content distribution, because producing content is fairly easy. The hard part is to distribute it. Really, really well. But to me, that should be at the core of any strategy, especially if you're in B2B. Producing good content, which is valuable to users, and then help users this way to actually discover your product when they want that. Very closely related to that is storytelling. Try to tell stories. Stories have some meaning. They give meaning to people. People like to hear stories. Stories usually have some kind of ritual, something where people can grasp. Again, there are a huge amount of examples in consumer marketing, Red Bull, also the Marlboro Man, something like that. That's all examples. But also in B2B. Take as a prime example Elon Musk, for example. I mean, he's got the B2C business, but what he does on the rocket side, that's brilliant storytelling. And you can do that literally in any market, is telling stories. And think of, okay, how can I actually make that extremely simple what you do, and then tell stories around what you do. it's trivial, but I think a lot of companies are totally neglecting that. But if you do it, it's very powerful. Then I'll come to something which is really a lot more technical. As a huge trend in online advertising in general, no matter what the medium is programmatic, which blends with big data, which blends with real-time bidding. There's a lot of terms in that, but at the end of the day, to me, programmatic is the term used in online media, online advertising, which is describing it in the best way. It's that it goes completely away from a one-to-one relationship between publisher and advertiser, but that things are actually, anything is done automatically. So any user segmentation is done automatically. Any type of delivering an audience is done automatically, and that the companies who do that well, so Facebook, for example, when you start switching off, like you can do individual targeting, you can just pick your groups, or you can let them do the job. The latter one always works much, much better, like by factor 2 or 3 or something. And so I think Facebook has mastered that, Google has mastered that, others have been mastering that too. The trend really goes into removing humans out of the equations, because targeting advertising has become big data and a huge correlation analysis of how likely is this particular person here to react to this type of banner, and making this decision within milliseconds between competing buyers, which can only be done on a technological level. And this is basically a technique which then will be used in any type of media. That is going now is of course on advertising. It finds its way into the TV. It'll find its way into VR and other things. So that is going to be a common layer across anything where people advertise in digital media. And at the end of the day, most of the stuff will be digital soon. Fourth big trend is chat. Artificial intelligence blends into that. Voice recognition blends into that. But at the end of the day, the big trend to me will be a one-on-one interaction on a human level. Is that a lot of the stuff still is very, very complicated. And so what any of those approaches are changing it, they're bringing advertising onto a very human level where people can simply order a flight, order booking, or in this case a cappuccino, like they would do it to a friend. They would text your friend, hey, order me something, and they would bring it. And essentially it needs a little bit of artificial intelligence, but mostly it needs the right process to absorb that. And that, of course, is very powerful for marketing, because then you're in a gateway, you can inject yourself in the conversation, but it will come in a much more natural way than any of the existing type of advertisings. And last but not least, recommendations is extremely powerful. It's a picture from a recommendation company, Acclamio, I've invested in, which facilitates social recommendations. To me, the most powerful companies are the ones which build a strong product, rely on recommendations. Stats say that 50% of all purchase decisions are driven, or at least mainly motivated, by recommendations. And we all do a lot of recommendations, but in most cases, the consumer doesn't earn anything except potentially the trust, which is a good asset, good thing to have. But facilitating that and making it easier for people is, to me, one of the biggest trends we see. And now coming to the media side. So that part, as I said, that had been existing in any type of media. But then, of course, there's new media. I'll start with the most trivial one, is mobile. That's not really a trend even more. It is a trend, but it's not news anymore. But we'll start with that because, of course, it's still utterly important to understand that desktop growth in online advertising is pretty much flat, while mobile advertising and mobile general grows by 20-25% per year and is already bigger than desktop. And, of course, you have much more possibilities. You have the camera. You have the device always with you. You have additional information with it. You have the location, stuff like that, which makes it much, much more powerful for online advertising if done in the right way. And so this is something which clearly will continue to be a trend for the next 5 years. And I can only urge everyone to just focus a lot more on mobile than you focus on desktop, even in industries like the ones you are in, which are, of course, better looked at, and where desktop still plays a very important role, but it's a trend which is absolutely inevitable. And then getting really into the most visionary side, the two big new media things in online advertising. The first one will be IoT, Internet of Things. So in this example, for example, Tado is a German company with smart thermostats. They do a really good job on reducing energy costs, but then also having the possibilities, for example, to upsell to new contracts with the power companies. And of course, in this case, you become, as a Tado, you become the gatekeeper to the customer's preference, and then selling them power contracts can be extremely lucrative. And also, of course, for the advertiser, for the power company, it's really crucial to be in that part. So advertising is not pushy in this sense anymore, but it's going to be selective based on what the customers do and what happens actually on the device. And so other examples in the consumer space would be the refrigerator, which automatically orders food. Then, of course, the refrigerator is making an extremely important purchasing decision. Or the example of the dash button of Amazon, where you can just order a new detergent. It's another example. You make a purchasing decision, and of course, that is the most relevant advertising goal you can have. And then to get to the last one is VR. To me, as a huge experience, and that's of a company called Vire from Cologne also. They're basically placing objects into the VR world. So those are all objects which are injected into normal VR environments. So those objects, they're either there or not there. And that, of course, makes this a very, very interesting approach for any type of advertiser. Because in VR, you can suddenly do a lot of things. So you have this apartment, and you fill it with products, or you take the products away. So you can very seamlessly place ads. And the beauty of virtual reality compared to other advertising, I mean, that's product placement. So again, the method is very close to what you've seen before, but suddenly you can measure that. In VR, you can see, okay, I've looked on this item for 2 seconds. You can see, did I get closer to this item, go to this item? You have interacted with the item, so maybe you've grabbed the virtual bottle, and that, of course, each of those interactions has a very different type of interaction than just looking at the things. That is a host of possibilities which you will suddenly have in VR, which are currently not possible. Also blending, and that's, I think, where the AR comes in, blending the real world and the existing world. And that is future. Of course, the numbers are still low in VR, but to me, that is really going to be one of the core new things we're going to see into advertising. And yeah, with this, I'll say thank you. Thank you very much for enduring this last session of the day. I'll going to wish you all a great party tonight. And I'm going to be around. There's my contact information. If anyone wants to email me, I'm also going to be around outside for a little bit. And yeah, with this, I'm going to finish and say thank you very much for being around.
Thank you, Tim.